Now, when I hear a story like this, I wonder if this thing may have been some type of a craft.
Today we are ranking the albums of NILE, and we're starting with Amongst the Catacombs of Nephren-Ka in 1998. So I'd say besides Cannibal Corpse and 6 Feet Under, NILE was the other brutal death metal band I was most familiar with in my formative metal years, but I was never like a die-hard listener at that time. But that said, I am enjoying digging deep and just rediscovering why this band is so great. Not only do these guys sound amazing from the beginning with those battering blast beats and absolutely devastating vocals, that extra layer of Egyptian imagery and atmosphere helps them stand out from the pack. The bombast of Ramses, Bringer of War, was unlike anything else people had heard at the time, and then the level of technicality they bring to the table is just so far above the competition, making this what I would argue a top 10 or maybe even a top 5 death metal album. Just a stunning and pretty unique display. There were some other bands out there doing similar things, but I feel like NILE really brought it to the forefront and just did something so cool that really people latched onto. So I'm putting this one at perfection. Then we got Black Seeds of Vengeance in 2000. This basically takes everything great about the debut and steps it up. The atmosphere is bigger, the songwriting is more complex, the performances are more jaw-dropping, you get that chanting part on Defiling the Gates of Ishtar with the gong in the background, and you really do get transported to another place in time. Proof that brutal death metal does not just have to be for cavemen. And while the other bands were smearing blood and fecal matter on the walls, the Chad NILE were crafting fucking worlds at this point. And so another one that has to go to perfection. Every song is amazing on like both of these albums. They truly are. I know sometimes I use perfection as like just the best, even if the album's not perfect, but I would say that these two are damn near perfect albums. Next up is In Their Darkened Shrines in 2002. So it's rare for lightning to strike twice, but now we're at the critically lauded album number 3 for NILE. I will say I don't like the production as much on this one, as all the chaos of the instrumentation and the crazier spots starts to turn into one big muddled mess, and something about the vocals just feels off in places too. But aside from that, this really is another incredible display and further cemented Carl as the incredible death metal guitarist that he is. The album also has their longest song at 18 minutes if you're not breaking it into parts, but personally, I think I'm partial to Short But Sweet Wind of Horus. So yeah, maybe a slight step down, but a lot to enjoy here, and I think it did pretty well in its year when I was ranking all these death metal albums by year. It is going to fantastic. Next up is Annihilation of the Wicked in 2005. Now this was actually the highest rated album on Metal Storm by the fans, which was interesting since I feel like I don't see this one come up as much on listen and conversation when I'm talking to other people. And personally, I wouldn't put it that high, but there is a lot to enjoy here still. It is a very, very excellent album. For one, I love the sitar intro. It really sets the stage, and then boom, Cast Down the Heretic just demolishes the listener. Also love Sacrifice to Sebek with those wild melodies, and Lashed to the Slave Stick is awesome. The production feels like an improvement over the previous album, in addition to the songs feeling less insane but more dynamic, even getting downright doomy towards the end, and I think that's also maybe the area where things slip a little bit for me. I think people who love Doom, and this comes up a lot in these lists, will probably enjoy these slower tracks, but me personally, I like my NILE fast and hard and aggressive, and I think that goes for just my death metal in general. So this one went too fantastic, but I would put it a little bit higher than the last one. They followed that up with Ithyphallic in 2007. So I'm curious what happened here, because this album feels like it should have come first, both in terms of production and songwriting. It just comes off as several steps back from what they've been building up and just leaning more heavily into classic death metal tropes. Like, the atmospheric stuff is still there, but it doesn't seem as intricately woven into the music. The styles feel like they kind of clash more. Remove those sections and this is just very much a 90s era sounding brutal death metal album, right down to the tinny sound of the drums. Others seem to feel the same, as this one drops nearly 10% in the fan ratings from the previous album on Metal Archives. It's still pretty impressive as far as performances go, but especially in the wake of the absolute mastery of the previous discography, it's just a jarring shift in direction and even a little bit boring. I would say. So, not bad, enjoyable to listen to, but it drops 2 for me, down to good. Then we got Those Whom the Gods Detest in 2009. This feels like a bit of a course correction and more of what the fans probably expected after Annihilation of the Wicked. And while this definitely sounds better, I do take issue with how NILE continued to lean into the doom riffs again to stretch songs longer than they probably need to be. You can argue with me on that. This is just my opinion, so by all means, put your own rankings down below in the comments. But thankfully, in their case, this is often complemented with some very unique regional touches and sudden shifts in direction, as with Kafir. But my issue remains in that there are parts of this record where I check out a little bit. To be clear, I think that the ratio still swings far in favor of fast and technical, but I don't end up feeling quite as invested in these either when compared to the previous album. Still a strong outing. Personal favorites for me include Utterances of the Crawling Dead, Permitting the Noble Dead to Descend, and Iskender Dul Karnan. I'm putting this one at great tier. Then we have At the Gate of Sethu in 2012. This was alternatively the lowest rated album on Metal Archives, and once more, I can kind of see why. There's a lot of times where I can disagree with those fan rankings, and I live for that, honestly. Like, I don't do it on purpose, but I will, like, that's what metal is all about. Metal exists because people disagreed with the status quo of kind of like what was on the radio waves, and so, by all means, I always want to tell the fan base, like, if you love an album that everyone hates, or you hate an album that everyone loves, you fly that freak flag high. Because, like, that's your opinion, and you are welcome to it. I love that. But in this case, there's a lot of places where I agree, and I think there are moments here where this feels just like another band trying to sound like NILE. It's like a bad NILE cover band. I think it's mostly the vocals, as the guitars and drumming are still quite impressive, but they just make large sections of this album feel completely unlistenable to me. So, yeah, not great stuff. I'm gonna put this one at okay. Followed that up with What Should Not Be Unearthed in 2015. I'd say this is an improvement over the previous album overall, but still not particularly memorable. A lot of it just blurs together for me, save for In the Name of Ammon and Evil to Cast Out Evil. And I just don't really have a lot to say about this one. And I think that's the most telling factor. Like, I love talking about music, right? And for me, that's why it's most fun to talk about albums I really, really love and that are really unique. I have a lot to say about that. And then I also love talking about albums that are really, really bad and are like almost so bad it's good. And I think that's why you see a lot of that, because there's like more to say. But when it's like somewhere in the middle, it's just like, meh. You know, what do I say that I haven't said about it? Like, oh yeah, there's technical guitar work, there's some really brutal vocals, it's okay, but it's not that great. Like, what more do you want? Like, I can't really dig into that one this much. And to me, that's almost like the worst offender. But I will say, again, I think it's better than the last one, so this one landed at good tier. Then we got Vile Nilotic Rites in 2019. Now, this album feels more like a return to form of the earlier albums, marrying technicality, atmosphere, and memorable songwriting into one awesome package. And I guess that kind of makes sense. There were some lineup changes here, and there was some discussion from the band that it felt like this was more of a team effort, is the way that they put it. I love the clang of the church bells on Long Shadows of Dread, and then the mathy pace changes of the Oxford Handbook, or the infectious serpent-like groove of Vile Nilotic Rites, or the Middle-earth-infused bombast of Seven Horns of War. There are also a number of guest vocalists on this album from a plethora of groups, but also Carl Sanders' own son. Very cool stuff. I don't say it's quite on the same level with the classics, but it's pretty high up there. I'm going to put it up at great. Now, before we go into the last album, as always, be sure to hit the like button if you're enjoying the video, dislike if you dislike, and again, comment below your rankings and your opinions on these things. Where do we agree? Where do we disagree? Also, consider sticking around and subscribing for way more death metal rankings just like this one for bands like Cannibal Corpse, Suffocation, and beyond. But that brings us to The Underworld Awaits Us All in 2024. Another killer opener taking me back to their first albums with that ominous riff and crash of the gong on Stille of Vultures, going into the first of many displays of perfect balance between insane technicality and infectious ancient sounding melodies. Already over 6 minutes long, but it makes every second count and keeps you on your toes, and then they don't skip a beat going into the pummeling second track, which with a name that long, you're not going to get me to say it. Love that we can get both epic longer tracks and some under 2 minutes that go just as hard as with To Strike with Secret Fang. Crazy bass and raging thrash energy on Nakata 2. Love the eerie backing vocals on Overlords of the Black Earth and Under the Curse of the One God. Killer groove on Doctrine of Last Things. Again, I'm not as into the doomier energy of the final 3 tracks, but within the context of the album, they still work pretty well. I'm even getting just a touch of bluesy Pantera from the guitars on True Gods of the Desert, and Lament for the Destruction of Time makes for an extremely malevolent instrumental closer. Great album. It's awesome to see them still kicking so strong this many years later. I do think that they're one of the standout bands of their era for a reason, and I am putting this album at fantastic. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal rankings, or this video for whatever your personal YouTube recommendation is, but that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.